like the Romans when they split, the Romans and the the Scandinavians and everything. This goes back to when there were two twins, right? One was a giant or a really tall one, and then the one was just average height or normal, something like that, whatever, right? And they called him like a priest and the king, right? That the priest is the average height, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then the king is like the tall, the giant one, right? The priest kills the king, kills the tall, right? And so, you try to figure out, like, why is it that the shorter one is the priest, right? Does it have something to do with his intelligence or his wit, right? And then you got the giant king, right? Who's kind of like, he's strong, but he's not smart,
Right.
right? So he does, so it's kind of like the religious always has maybe a kind of, hold over the, the community or something like that. You know what I mean? I mean, I kind of see similarities with that story and Jacob and Esau, right?
Yeah.
Jacob is kind of like the in-house kid, you know what I mean? He don't really do a lot of the hunting and stuff like that. But then you got Esau, who's like the brawny one, you know what I mean? He's a hunter, you know what I mean? He's, whatever. And Jacob ends up stealing, Esau's birthright, right? So it's kind of like you got
He's sneaky, yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So you got the priest king kind of mentality going on again, right? Because who was supposed to get the blessing?
Yeah, Esau.
Supposed to be Esau, right? So he's kind of like supposed to be the one that gets the inheritance, the wealth,
Mm-hmm.
right? But Jacob ends up, taking it from him, and of course, the whole story is, Jacob, even when they were in the womb, Jacob had him by the heel, had Esau by his heel. So, it's just weird things like that. I think there's something about anybody that seems like, a physical challenge or, not normal. There's, you have to place something on them to make yourself feel better.
Mm-hmm.
In order to say, like, that's how I feel better, is to put something on them. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, yeah, they're tall, but they're not smart, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's always got to be a takeaway.
Yeah, he's smart, but he's ugly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Whatever it is. You're a billionaire, but it's because you're greedy and you cheated. That's what they say,
Right. Yeah.
There's that's always like so sacred now in today's,
at
least our generation.
Yeah.
This built-in deep resentment against any billionaire. Well, Elon Musk, he's a billionaire, but he's a cheater. He takes tax dollars. It was like, technically
Jeff
true,
Bezos,
but
Jeff, and they did get him though. They did get him on that whole, when he was having when he had that whole relationship with some other woman or whatever,
with what I mean? Bezos,
yeah, you know what I mean. So they slapped him with that, you know what I mean. And I don't really know enough about Bezos, you know what I'm saying. But to me, and this is not to say anything negative about him, but I think there is a difference between Bezos and, say, Elon Musk, in the sense that Bezos doesn't strike me as the type of person he's not he's not as creative. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
it's more kind of like
left brain.
Like consumerism. How can we build up a network or whatever where everybody can just buy stuff from one thing, right?
Right.
Whereas Elon Musk is like, I want to go to the moon. I want to go to Mars. Like, we need to set up colonies.
He's making
stuff like that.
Elon has a cultural statement he wants to make with his project.
Yeah. And so that's one of the things that, I mean, but I get your point. You know what I mean? It's like, there's always a way. You know what I mean? It's you got to find something on them. You know what I mean? To make them.
In a lot of old-fashioned societies, there's still that thing called the evil eye, the jealous eye that looks at you.
Yeah, yeah.
And a lot of people in countries in the East and so forth, they talk about how difficult it is to have success in those countries because there's so much culturally acceptable envy baked into the community that if you try to achieve anything, they put that evil stink eye on you, and it's supposed to like catch you and draw you into their mimetic conflict and drama and hate.
Right.
And that's what they've talked about. The difference in America is that there's a cultural appetite to allow people to achieve without calling them a cheater and a crook and a con artist.
Right.
But that we're losing that because of identity politics and everything. We're losing that.
Yeah.
And that's something we can think about, talk about. I want to go back to that Jacob and Esau thing you said. What do you think is the message of that? What's the point of that from an anthropological thing? Anything that you can think about from that? The idea of
I mean
birthright from another,
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it has to. Well, so I think the way that I'll just lay out the story, and then maybe we can kind of try to come up with something together, because that story is definitely difficult. But of course, I think it does lay out kind of the structure of twin rivalry, or doubles or whatever. You know what I mean? But the way I see it is, I think Esau marries a woman outside of the Israelite tribe, outside of the, his group, right? And so he gains like the resentment of his mom, of what's her name, Rebecca.
Mm-hmm.
And so Isaac, by that time he's blind, right? So he can't distinguish. He only knows Esau because he's really hairy, right? So that's kind of another, I think, trope on.
He's an Italian boy.
Yeah, you know what I mean, or whatever you want to call it. He's a caveman. You know what I mean? Neanderthal.
Yeah, we'll call him Neanderthal. That's the one group we can talk about with impunity right now.
Yeah, he's a Neanderthal.
So Esau was a Neanderthal. He had that latent gene kick in.
Right, he's a Neanderthal, and so, anyways, he's marries outside of the group, or marries outside of the tribe, or whatever they are, because at that time they weren't considered Jews. At that time, they were considered Israelites. Right, that's not until after Jacob's name is changed. Right, but Rebecca doesn't like that he, I guess, married someone outside the group. Jacob is not married yet, right? So Rebecca schemes with Jacob, telling Jacob, since your dad is blind, can't see, take some hair from some kind of animal, or whatever, put it on your hand or whatever. So when your dad goes to touch you, he'll think you're Esau, and he'll give you the blessing instead of your brother, right? And so Jacob goes and makes, but see that there's two stories there, because it's also Jacob tells Esau says to Jacob, I'm hungry, and Jacob says, I'll make you some porridge or whatever, right? And or some
cream of wheat is what it was.
Some lentils, I think, like lentil stew or something like that. Yeah. So he makes it for him, but he tells him, you gotta give me your birthright. And so Esau is like, I'll give you my birthright, just give me the stew, right? So I don't really know. I don't know which one is, if they're supposed to be like, if the story flows together, or if there's maybe two stories that are kind of being weaved together, right? Because if it's the one where Jacob tricks Esau by giving him the stew, then I think that really corresponds to the idea of kind of like, you got this priest king behavior going on, where the priest is kind of witty smart, can undermine, and the king is strong, he can wield power through force, but he's too stupid. What I mean? To understand anything. He'll give away his birthright for some stew. You know what I mean? He don't understand nothing, right? So, I think with that side of the story, I think that corresponds well to that like ancient Indo-European story I was telling you about, where you got the one twin who's kind of represents the priest, and then the other twin who's a giant, kind of representing the king, and the priest twin kills the king twin, right? So it's always this, wittiness against strength, right? Wittiness against physical strength, right? Um, and that, they're always kind of, you know, there's always a conflict, I guess, between those two things. Right?
And Esau must have had that Wolfman complex, because if you had to put, I don't know what animal it says. Was it a lamb wool or something?
I think it was either lamb
or a llama's hair.
No, a deer or something like that. It was like
So
a
you
deer, a
feel that
stag.
fur, he would be like, "Yeah, that's my
Yeah.
son. He must have had a wolf complex." Like,
Right.
like Michael J. Fox's character. Remember that? Teen Wolf playing basketball with the hair all over, the Teen Wolf. I think that's what it was called.
No, but I do remember that one with what's that cat's name? He would turn into a werewolf. But he was in high school or something like that.
That's Michael J. Fox. Yeah, that's
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought it was Jason Bateman.
Oh, maybe they made a new one of it. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, whatever. I think Esau represents more of the character of the warrior. You know what I mean? The hunter. You know what I mean? The unafraid. The alpha male, right? You know what I mean? He's kind of that character, right? And so Jacob is the other way around. He's kind of like the book smart guy. You know what I mean? He's I'll sit at home, you know what I mean? Or I'll fish instead of hunt. You know what I
mean? What do you think of some of the anthropological meaning there? I mean, is that just the way the Bible, the Old Testament is? It's kind of subverting the tropes of paganism, where in most pagan myths, it seems like, like it's usually honoring physical prowess,
Yeah.
The history belongs to those who slaughter the best and most ruthlessly and efficient. And
right.
I know there's probably a lot of legends and myths that also honor wits and cunning, of course, but
do
you
think
is it inverting that intentionally, you think?
I don't think it's intentional in kind of a inversion. I mean, the thing is you have to look at it from, are these stories about real individuals, or are they stories that tell a story about groups of people? Right? Because when you think about it, right, all the you have Esau, who's supposed to be the father of the Edomites, right?
Yeah.
And then you have Jacob, who's supposed to be the father of Israel. So what I think, for me, I think what that story characterizes is really kind of a struggle between Canaanite groups about identity, right? Who's kind of over who, right? Or who's in control of who, right? Because the Israelites are, before they become Israelites or what have you, they were Hebrew speakers, and they were a group in that was a part of a larger group, right? Which are called the Canaanites, right? And the Canaanites include the Moabites, the Edomites, the Israelites, the Phoenicians, who were in, who would be in present day Lebanon, and going out into North Africa over the Carthage, right? So you have all these groups. They kind of speak a similar language, but then they kind of spread out and become dialects of the ancient Canaanite language. So I think there's stories that speak to kind of real conflicts between these groups, and because they're so similar, they're trying to find ways to, kind of differentiate themselves, right? You got the Israelites, they come up with ways to differentiate themselves, like circumcision, don't eat pork, right? The belief in one God, right? Uh, you know, those sorts of things. And of course, always to say that, our group is sort of separate because we don't do certain things like, human sacrifice or child sacrifice or what have you, right? I don't, but then the question would become, but how do they know to do the ethical thing, right? Like, how did they know what the ethical thing was? How did they know that killing children was not the right thing to do, right? And of course they haven't completely left the violent mold, right? Because they still, they're still like this carryover of circumcision, right? As a rite of passage or what have you. You know what I mean? But I do think there are, of course, I think they speak to real historical, events over time. It may not have been like one thing that took place. You know what I mean? That this story is written from that point of view. I think it's more they've had continuous contact with each other, right? And they're starting to see differences amongst each other, right? They're no longer Canaanites. Now they're, Israelites, the Moabites, the Edomites, whatever. And so now, it's just that we only have the story according to, the Israelites, right? We have the story from their side. But yeah, it's hard to draw like a moral, lesson from it. You know what I mean? Rather than seeing it as just maybe more of a kind of like a history lesson. That's why we don't like the Edomites to this day. You know what I mean? Or something like that. You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, what do you think it is though? I mean,
So you're saying it's like a kind of mythological way of reminding people why we stay away from those people and why those people are not us and they're not as good as us, or
yeah.
they don't have as much as we do or something like that.
That's the thing, because it's like I want to be on the side where like of Gerard, where he kind of like has this idea. It's like no, these are real events that are taking place, right? We need to take those myths not as moral lessons, but as real events. And I want to say, I think they're real events, right? A moral lesson could be drawn after the fact, right? So you could say, well, this is what they did to our people, and that's why we don't go around them, right? So you got to, if you split that in half, this is the reason why we don't like those people. That's the historical part. That's the real fact, right? And then you say, and that's the reason why we don't hang around them. That's the moral part, right? It's like, this happened, and I'm telling you, don't hang around them because this happened, right? So, you know what I mean? It's. I think that the real event takes place, and then there's some kind of moral reasoning behind it. You know what I mean?
And I'm thinking about I want to think about David and Goliath too. That's an interesting story because you started off talking about how people who are tall can tend to be easy targets for envy, right? And I wonder if Goliath was being otherized a little bit there too. Maybe he had a different perspective. Maybe he didn't actually say, "I'll ground your teeth, your bones into You know what I mean? But he
Yeah,
didn't say
yeah,
that. Maybe he was turned into Grindel a little bit.
yeah, yeah, and
Maybe he was
yeah.
an artistic guy. Maybe he actually liked to paint on the weekends. You know?
I mean,
Maybe
so
Goliath had
and
a
that,
mutation. You know, maybe he looked
yeah,
like Andre the Giant, but he wasn't 9 foot. You know, I don't know.
right, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's hard to say because I kind of also feel like you know even with the Old Testament, right? Um, they're they're wrestling with scapegoating and not scapegoating. You know what I mean? It's they're going back and forth, right? They don't like the enemies. You know, you got Joshua fit the
Yeah, it's like
battle
a
of Jericho.
daisy to
You know what I
scapegoat to not to
mean?
scapegoat to
Right.
scapegoat to not to scapegoat, right?
Exactly,
And
exactly.
that's
So you
why
got
and that's why the Bible is such an easy target for these modernists
yeah,
to cherry pick and attack
right,
because it's so open and honest about the struggles of the
right,
people
right,
trying to become self-aware of their
right,
scapegoating violence and their
right,
hidden hierarchical structures of
right,
coercion,
right.
and they lay it all out on the line. A lot of it, you know, is
Yeah,
exposed to the
yeah,
light of history, and
yeah.
we are self-righteously saying it's
Well,
you hear
see,
that all the time. Every time I write an article
yeah,
for any of these secular publications and I mention
yeah,
imitating Jesus or something, they're like, "Oh
yeah,
yeah, it's nothing but garbage in the Bible. Why
yeah.
would we ever want to go back to that mass genocidal Dawkins? You know the Dawkins
Right.
cartoons."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But see, that this is the reason why, and see, this is for me. This is one of the things that this is why I've always. It's like, what's the alternative? What's the alternative? And so I've always looked for the alternative of, you know, say the Bible and say Christendom and knowing that those stories and narratives, right? Because there was always, I think, two camps in you know, say when you got to high school, when you went to college, it's those that knew like the Bible and you know were deep Christians, or you know, and then of course you had Christians that didn't know any of the story. They just believe in Jesus. You know what I mean? They believe in the power of the Holy
Mm-hmm.
Spirit, right? But then
Right.
there were those of us that kind of we knew the stories, right? We knew the narratives in the Bible. But then you had like the more secular kids. They knew all the Greek, you know, philosophical, you know, narratives. They knew Socrates, they knew Plato, they knew Aristotle,
And you
right?
said
They
high
knew,
school.
yeah,
Not my
yeah.
high school. You had a nice high school, man. I tell you what. You
No,
make your
man.
high
I
school
listen.
sound like friggin' Athens or something. Everybody just walk
It,
around with
it, it, it
olive
was.
trees
I'm gonna
and
tell you something.
things in their hair.
Me being in the International Baccalaureate program, that's what it was like, right? It was like me, the lone star from Jerusalem, comes to Athens. You understand what I'm
Are you
saying?
saying you were a scapegoat? How convenient, huh?
I was something. I don't know what I was.
Were you a
I think I was.
scapegoat?
I think I was. I think I was. I think I was the newcomer, and then I wasn't. I wasn't. You know, I wasn't. So they, you know, they came from that background. You know, they came from that background of parents that were steeped in, you know, Greek philosophy and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Even if they weren't, they were given that opportunity to do so, right? And you know, I don't necessarily have a problem with that because I still believe that you know Greek philosophy is to be is you know it's it's a there's something about I think Greek philosophy that tends to try and uh, make everything about a talking point, right? Let's argue and you know we'll have rhetoric and grammar and we'll say all these things, you know, and logic to try and reason out, you know, whatever. But me, I always felt like it's just another way of a person trying to like beat another person in an argument, right? It's just another way of another of a person trying to sound smart enough or intelligent enough to try and win an argument because it can't win at anything else. You know what I mean? Like, that's if you think about Plato and stuff like that, I think he wrote something about the pharmacon or something like that, where it's like this idea that we don't we don't want the poets in the land. We don't want the poets. We don't want the singers and all of that, because they tell too much of the truth, right? With their poetry, they speak to too much of the reality of life or whatever, and we can't get nothing done. We can't talk about anything if they're around. So we got to expel them. We got to get them outside, right? In order for us to have a conversation. And you see it's still like that today, right? In order for smart people, intellectuals to do intellectual work, they can't be disturbed. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You can't have conflicts. So the only way to avoid that is to keep that at bay with the law, right? Or keep that at bay by force, right? In order for these intellectuals to get on television, right? To get on, C-SPAN, right? Or whatever it is, and talk, you need some kind of civility, right? Can't have people, going off, about something that pissed them off the other day. You know what I mean? You need a space or a square or a circle in which people can do that kind of talking, right?
Interesting. Yeah. So
And
you're talking about the public. You're not talking about just academics, the academician circles in universities. You're talking about the broader
yeah,
narrative
I'm
of what does it mean to be an intellectual, right?
yeah, what it means to be a philosopher,
And that's falling
right?
apart right now, though. Yeah.
It's falling apart because they're not. I think because philosophy is maybe starting to lose its attempt at trying to be, this rationality, right?
Mhm.
People are not. They don't want to hear that anymore, right? What
They
they
want
want to
blood. They want
They
the
want
blood.
right, and see what's the opposite of that rationalizing and argumentation. There's some kind of act that's taking place, and you see that with the Jew with the ancient Israelites, right? The way that they deal with that is to have some kind of a ritualized sacrifice, right? To have some kind of what have you, and then of course
But the Greeks were, to be fair, were doing sacrifices too, right?
they were doing sacrifices, but see, people will say the Greek philosophers didn't really take it seriously.
Mhm.
They kind of just did it as a way to, you know,
For good
let's
luck,
do
for
it,
fortune.
because their thing is that the Greeks didn't consider. I guess for the Greek philosophers, their whole thing was that the gods don't really care about us. They are they're indifferent to
Isn't
our
that more
concerns.
Epicurus, or is that all of them?
I think I don't. I'm not sure, but I
Epicurus would say something like, the gods are doing their thing, so
yeah.
let's just live our lives and have a good one.
But I
Mhm.
think Socrates thought that too,
Okay.
right? It's
Yeah.
that if Apollo is whatever, he's above. He doesn't really care about my what I'm doing, right?
Mhm.
You know, they don't have the time to concern themselves with human affairs in such a way as to bring plague or blessing. You know what I mean? They're doing whatever they're doing, right? Uh, so you know, I mean, I I think the breaking point is that the Jews really did believe that God had a hand in human affairs, right? And was concerned about having a relationship with mankind, right? Um, it's
So,
just that
in
it
the
takes them.
pagans' perspective, the Jews had a busybody god.
You're right, a busybody God, or and of course that God uh, would could be vengeful and could also be you know beneficent, or benevolent, right? And um, when you think about the Jewish God, of course, it's always hard to know which one he is at which time, right? You don't have this kind of demarcation where it's like, okay, God is always loving and kind and, merciful, right? It's not until, Christianity that you get that, right? It's I mean, of course you see it with the prophets. But see, the thing about the prophets is that some of the prophets warned of destruction. Some of the prophets warned of God's vengeance.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the prophets say, God wants mercy, not sacrifice, right? But it's also the case that God is going to loose the Babylonians or the Akkadians on you and put you into bondage, right? You know what I mean? He's going to use the power of another group because you haven't been, you haven't been keeping to the law, right? You haven't been following the law. You haven't been, you've been worshiping other gods. You've
It's
been
kind of like
committing
karma
adultery.
too, there a little bit. The
Right.
idea of you reap what you sow, and
right.
if
Right.
you're antagonistic and lawless, you're going to attract that kind of lawless antagonism onto your neck.
Right. And
I
that's
think
the thing.
It reminds me of that power of positive thinking, where
Mm-hmm.
where the head leads, the body follows, and where your
Mm-hmm.
where your mind leads.
Mm-hmm.
If you're always thinking you're going to get sick, you're going to attract disease. They say, because your mind. The placebo effect is a real phenomenon that's more powerful than science has any understanding of. So the idea of like the placebo effect of a society sowing violence into its reality through conquering from other countries is interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think the nature of God in the Old Testament is definitely conflictual. I don't think there's any way Christians, because because Christians, the thing is that we claim the Old Testament as our inheritance too, right? But we have less of a reason to back up the Old Testament than, say, the Jewish people do, right? Because that's what they hold to as the sacred scripture, right? We've got a a new covenant, right? that looks quite different.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say that Jesus is not drawing on the Old Testament, but I think what Jesus is drawing on is a particular narrative within the Old Testament, right? He's drawing on a particular prophetic message that's different than, say, all the others, right? He's not discounting the prophets, right? He's not discounting, right? He's like when he says, I haven't come to change the law, right? I've come to fulfill it, right? In a sense, it's like I've come to perfect it. You know what I mean? I've come to give it its fine tuning. You know what I mean, or what have you. And that's, I think, the difference is that the Old Testament has a lot in it that is just, you can't get around that. You know what I mean? And for Christians, for me, I always interpret that as we were getting there. We just, you know what I mean? We just had too many scandalons going on. There's too many, there's constant stumbling blocks, right? And that's not that's natural, right? That happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Christ comes and he kind of, you know what I mean? It's and that's why it's the idea of like God in the flesh, because it's this perfect example of living, a righteous life, right? And that's something that even the prophets couldn't totally, live up to, right? Moses, is not able to see the promised land because he says something negative towards the Israelites, right? I would probably say the same thing, given the fact that those cats, you know what I mean? And of course, this is me going back to the whole thing of, if I was back there, I would have done better. You know what I mean? I'd have been better, right? But I probably would have said the same thing that Moses said. Like, you ungrateful, sons of bees. Like, you know what I'm saying? I done sat here with you guys.
But Jesus calls the religious hypocrites a brood of vipers.
Brood of vipers. That's right.
Snake, which is interesting because it calls back the seed of the serpent.
Right.
From the garden.
Right.
You guys are part of that serpent thing, that's pretty mean. So how come Jesus gets to say mean names, but we can't? And that makes him perfect. But when we say it, it's
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, maybe, I don't know. I mean, it could have something to do with the fact of like telling the truth out of truth versus truth out of anger, right? Like, I'm telling you about yourself because that's what you are. Versus I'm telling you.
But wasn't Moses right that they were grumbling?
Hey, in my opinion, he was right. Hey, because you imagine you staying with the people for that long and they're still like complaining. But
what if someone took over the microphone for that narrator part and said, "Yeah, we had to put old Moses out to pasture"?
Hey, it could have
been the alpha chimp that had outlasted his welcome, and there was some young bucks waiting to take over as the new alpha, and they had to ride it off in the story.
Right.
Well, we took old Moses, went up to the mountain, and an angel put him to bed. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Exactly. Okay. I'm skeptical of that. You know what I mean?
Maybe
I'm skeptical of that.
Yeah. Maybe.
But you know why I think? Yeah, exactly. Someone, the old man went. He said, "Look! You can see Canaan from here." Pop, throw him in. Put a little sign on that says, "Yeah, the angel put him to bed." And it's like, that's it. We'll call it a day.
Yeah.
He's a little too cranky. This guy sounds like,
right.
The old Grumpy Man movie. Remember? So it's like, the thing about the text that I think is important about the Bible. When we talk about the Bible. Mm-hmm. It's the story of Israel, right?
Yeah.
And then Jesus becomes Israel. So it starts off, to me, I see the Bible as like a documentary.
Mm-hmm.
That movie, the opening of The Simpsons where it's in the clouds, The Simpsons, and then you go straight into a town, right?
Right.
That's how I see the Bible. Like it's like the story of man, and then you're in the clouds, and then you go zoom in on a little town. In that little town, you're going to start tracing their development, and that's this people.
Right.
And so I see the Bible as like a documentary with various narrators holding a camera, because when you watch a TV series, they have a different director on some of the episodes. There's a different style, different angles. Some of them are not as good as others, and that's kind of part of the anthology of a TV series or something.
Yeah,
and I see that similarly with the Bible anthology, is that you're getting this microcosm story that is a representation of mankind, right? And also the individual through anthropological evolution. And so it's the relation. What does the word Israel mean? The word Israel means to wrestle with God.
Right.
So the Bible is the story of wrestling with God.
Yeah.
And so to me, if you're going to read the Bible appropriately, there needs to be some wrestling with God in the engagement of it.
Yeah.
If it's a flat text, there's no wrestling.
Yeah.
If every voice in every single story in the Bible is just flatly 100% Holy Spirit approved, and here's another thing. Here, I'm going to put it this way.
Yeah.
It is Holy Spirit approved, every piece of the text.
Yeah.
But just because an artist approves the inclusion of that text, doesn't mean that the artist means for the narrator to be reliable in that moment. You see what I mean?
Right. Or have like some kind of clean slate thing going on. Like everything's got to be right in the text, right? It's got to be morally correct. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's like I think so many modern Christians deify the Bible to the detriment of the Bible. So when you idolize the Bible, you objectify the Bible, and you denigrate the Bible, because the line between adoration and murder is thin, like Gerard says. I like that line.
Yeah.
And so you adore the Bible, but in your adoration of the Bible becomes made in your image. where you say, well, if I was God, I'd make a flat dictatorial message.
Right.
And everything is just you obey. You obey.
Right.
That's the message. Because that's how a lot of Christians read, particularly the Old Testament, and then they read it in the New Testament. It's just obey, which that's not Christianity, that's Islam. Now, there is obedience in of course.
Yeah.
But the idea that that's the ultimate message of all the text, just obey.
Right.
That sounds like Satan. It sounds like Islam. Because, Satan's all about just obey to my tyranny. Just worship me. Just say uncle to me.
Yeah.
And you're good. But, when you look at like Islam means submission. So to me, the way modernists read, modern conservative Christians and so forth, some of them read it, they're reading an Islamic approach to the text where they're the people of the book. We're not the people of the book. We're the people of Jesus.
Right.
A person but in history.
You see, I mean, but
I just threw a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah.
I saw you like, where do I start? Okay.
With the Islam thing, like, man, here we go, brother. But one thing I would say is like, I think that way of thinking has good intentions.
What way of thinking?
The way that right? Because Judaism is the same way. It's not any different, right?
Really?
And no, it's not. Because
I thought that there's a tradition in rabbinical tradition to see the different perspectives in Torah as in conflict, in debating, right? So you get the priestly perspective, then you get the prophetic perspective, and you got to weigh it and figure out the paradox, right?
You got to. I can understand that. Like I can understand the whole rabbinical, whatever the scribal, whatever you have, some groups that, all they do is go to the synagogue and, speak and talk and debate and yada, yada, yada. Right. But they have the same attitude, which is God is not knowable. Right. And that the only way to know him is to follow his laws. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? You have to do these things in order to know God, which of course, that is the ancient Israelite kind of precept. It's you must follow these commandments. You must obey, this covenant in order to be in the right step with God. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's the same kind of character,
Well, maybe I should
as submission.
Maybe I should distinguish that. I mean, like later Judaism has this idea of like the prophets battling with the priestly voices in the Old Testament, or they're
I would want to say rabbinical Judaism, you know what I mean, has that attitude. But see,
a little bit more postmodern, a little bit more. You got to wrestle with it.
But see,
and I know I know that people can say I'm getting close to that, but I don't really think I'm there.
I think the reason why they end up kind of being that way, right, is because see, when people, and this is one thing that I really have a critique of when it comes to Christianity and Judaism. I don't like when people say Christianity came from Judaism, right? That needs to be that needs to be fleshed out. You can't just say that, right? Because when you say that, then it sounds like Christianity came from Judaism in the sense that the way that we have Judaism today, right? The way we see Judaism today, it's rabbinical, it's scribal text, right? It's there's a ritual formulation around it with the the leather around the arm and the in the head, and wearing the talit and things like that. And what I would want to say is, I think Judaism as we have it today, rabbinic Judaism as we have it today, and Christianity are from the same source, which is Temple Judaism. Okay. And, you might say Judaism as we have it today, right, or since Second Temple Judaism, is more of a scribal type of Judaism, and they're debating amongst each other about what is and isn't correct within the text, whereas Christianity kind of follows more of the ritualistic, the rituals that you see in Second Temple Judaism. right? And the scapegoat, right? The sacrificial lamb. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Because we already have come to the place of having a Messiah. We've already come to that understanding of the whatever the sacrificial lamb, or the Son of Man, and all of that. And they haven't come to that yet. They're still trying to interpret all those things, and that's what you know makes their you know that's what makes their faith, right? It's this kind of continuous you know interpretation of the Bible, and there's nothing completely wrong with that. I think Christians should have that too, right? And I think Muslims have that too, right? I think all of them have that kind of interpretation. I mean, Islam used to have that. In the medieval ages, there was a lot of debate and discussion around what the text meant and stuff like that. But there does come, I think there's moments when all of them, um, but see, and this is the thing where it's like it's really hard to say, because I think it's like with Judaism and Islam, they have this concept of God that is just unknowable. You know what I mean? You cannot completely know God, and there's a reason why they reject, right, Christ, right, being in human flesh. It's because that's a way to know God, right? That's the way to know God, right? It's kind of like, in order for us to wake up to our problems, we had to see God in human flesh. We had to see Him like us, right? That's kind of deep. That doesn't appear within Judaism and Islam, because their whole thing is about following the law. You must follow the law,
Mm-hmm.
right, in order to please God. And that's the best way to know God, is to obey God, like you were saying, right? Not to understand God, right? Like in the Old Testament, God just said, "My ways are not your ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts." You know what I mean? Don't try to understand me, right? And if you think about Babylon and the Tower of Babel, right? These cats, they want to make a tower that goes all the way up to heaven, right? There's this professor's name is, I think, Leon Koss or something like that, and he talks about, he kind of has his own like hermeneutic of that, where he says the reason why the Tower of Babel failed, right, and God says, "Let us confound their language so they can't understand each other," is because there's this idea that a society, in order for it to stick together, to have cohesion, they need a law first. They need legal boundaries first in order to create the state, right? You can't have the state without creating rules first. And so God destroyed their attempt at creating a tower, because they had not uh, created a legal system that he could have the stamp of his approval, you know, on a legal system set down. It was not until Moses that happened, right? But of course, the Tower of Babel is in Genesis,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you see all these things happening, right? And then once the law comes, see, then the Jewish people, or the Israelites, they know what to do. They know how to act, and it's up to them to do it or not, right? It's before that they were kind of like in confusion, you know what I mean? Because they didn't know, they didn't know what they were. They didn't know anything, right? And it's like after the law comes, now you got this this precept or whatever that's there that you got to follow,
Mm-hmm.
right? And every time they don't follow that, then that's where you get this kind of like push and pull. You know what I mean? They're not, you know what I mean? So I you know, for me, like it's not that like I'm against laws and stuff like that. I'm not against the legal tradition and stuff. I mean, we've talked about this before. I think in the sense that the only way to have somewhat kind of like the only way to have somewhat of a cohesive state outside of Christianity is to go back to the law. You know what I'm saying? Like you can't. There's
What
no other
law?
way for it to work.
You're talking about the law of the Torah, you're saying?
I mean, the law of the Torah, right? Or just
Hammurabi's code?
I mean, just
You're talking
just
about law in general,
yeah,
not
I'm talking about law in
you're not talking
general,
about
right?
Torah.
But
Okay.
yeah, but what I would say is that I think that in the Western tradition, of course, the law really does kind of mimic the Jewish tradition, right?
Right.
The Israelite tradition, right? It's this kind of like this. I mean, the whole idea of like not killing someone, and the whole idea of you know doing certain things that you know we kind of found our ethics based on that. You know what I mean? Like you're not allowed to just you know thou shalt not kill, right? But
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and then so the common law tradition, the civil law traditions, they're rooted in that, right? And there's no real way to get outside of that. But I think if you opt out of the Christian faith, that is the only thing to return to. Otherwise, you know, you just have it. You will have real chaos, right? So you have
So
to,
you're saying that to turn to the state.
right.
Yeah.
You can't. There is no other. There's either opt for the Christian message or
But the irony is that the reason why we turn to the state is because the church continues to be in bed with the state in its
yeah, yeah,
theology, in its hermeneutic, and in its witness to world events and issues in the community, the neighborhoods, and the world.
yeah.
And it's like, so you get this tainted Christianity
Hmm.
in the experience of being a part of the church, which
Hmm.
repels people out of the church and into
Hmm.
the arm. It's like going from the kettle into the fire,
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
you're in the kettle, you're like, wait a second, this is hypocritical. You guys
Right,
supported the
right,
Iraq war, you guys did this, you guys did that. Jump
right,
out into the flames of nihilistic state tyranny.
right,
And
right,
I
right.
was mentioning this on my radio program recently that there's this relationship between the angry violent mob.
Hmm.
I heard in Louisville they're having the Black Lives Matter affiliate there is threatening businesses, like you've got to get a grade from them,
Hmm.
how many people of color you hire as percentage of your staff, and all these different rituals you have to do, or
Yeah.
else they will not protect you from vicious aggressive protests, or
Hmm.
maybe worse, you know what I mean?
Wow.
So it's like mafia style, and you look at that
Yeah.
stuff and you're like, wait, we're reverting back to something that we're trying to
Hmm.
get past. Why are we going
Hmm.
back here?
Hmm.
And so it's one of those things where for me, uh you know I I'm I feel like we have an urgency. We have a real urgency in terms of, we don't want to see a lot of people suffer. We have an
Right.
urgency to get people to look at the message of Jesus with this fresh perspective
Hmm.
anthropologically.
Hmm.
uh we're in a race against time here, because I do think that um the when Christianity spreads in history, it opens up the avenue for technological innovations
Hmm.
outside the enclosure of violence, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Of the eternal return of sacrifice.
Right.
And of course, it does it slowly, because, like everybody will say who's skeptical of Christianity, Christianity and the church participated in burnings and so forth. That's right.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's slowly losing that luster, and it slowly starts to make the texts more
Hmm.
realistic, so that when we read our recent history, we're repulsed by the liar of the
Right.
narrator
Right.
lying about those people causing the plague, or these people causing this, or what have you. So we're
Right.
becoming really irritated by our ancestors.
Yeah.
And
Well.
so,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
well,
Well, so what I wanted to ask you is, then why do you think people opt out of the Christian message? Is it because they're skeptical about the nature of other people, right? In the sense that how do I know this person is really going to live by the Christian message? I don't know if he's really, you know what I'm saying?
You're talking about like going to church and not trusting the church people there?
No, I mean, let's say, both of us came from different religions, right? And, you join as a Christian, but I say I'm still skeptical about that, because even if I love my neighbor, how do I know my neighbor is really going to love me back? How do I know my neighbor is really going to do the things that Christ said?
That's a good point.
What if I leave my door open?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's a good point. Yeah, it's a valid point, because it's something, look, I'm about to go live on radio, and I tell and my message that I tell people on radio is that, we got to love our neighbors as ourselves, and that's what we start a positive reciprocal message. But being honest about it, I don't know. But we can the thing about acting with Israel in mind. I like that word Israel. And I like the picture of wrestling with somebody in the dark that you think is God. It could have just been a guy trying to fix your cable or something. You don't know. So you're like in the middle, you see a bump in the night and you're struggling and wrestling, and that's the picture of reality.
Right.
That God, right. And I think the Bible is extremely funny like that. If you think of it that way, it's like a satire on human experience.
Right. Right.
There's a random dude in the dark and he twists your ankle or hurts your whatever.
Right.
That's God.
Yeah.
Because you're like, what's the point of this? What's the meaning of this?
Right.
What is the meaning of this? That question that we're supposed to ask is at the heart of Christian faith.
Right.
You're not supposed to have certainty.
Right.
And that's something that people don't want. And that's why we continually reject Christianity, not just in the classical metaphysical, oh yeah, that's fairy tale, but in the much more honest thing, which is not wanting to be like Christ.
Right.
And so, you're right. I mean, to say to someone, hey, try this out. And they say, well, what if I love my neighbor and they destroy me? And some people have used that to say that Christianity is an enabler of abuse.
Yes.
That Christianity enables the oppressors to continue their persecution because it's not tough enough on persecutors.
Right.
And that's the room by which this, what they call critical theory, has now come in and taken a hold of our culture, because they've said, no. Christianity is a conspirator in collusion with the wicked capitalists, the patriarch community, and the whole, the white supremacists, the whole thing, So it's okay to tear down Jesus statues if their skin tone is a little bit too white.
Right.
Because that's just a symbol of Christianity's long-held conspiracy.
Right.
Collusion with evil, wicked race and an evil, wicked gender and an evil, wicked economic system.
Right. And and you see that, and this, this is not this whole narrative of kind of like Christianity being weak, an enabler, a weak religion. Machiavelli, I think, called it a woman's religion.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's a female religion. You know what I mean? Nietzsche called it it's a weak religion. It doesn't, you don't have no Ubermensch in there. You know what I'm saying?
I think he thought Jesus was an Ubermensch, but Paul's Christianity was the weakling stuff, right?
Well, I'm not sure, but I know one thing. I know Nietzsche was like, I don't like this religion because it makes Europeans weak.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Because the popular application of Christianity, he thought, was missing the mark of Jesus, but hitting the target of weak losers mentality. It was resentment or whatever.
Right. And see, that's something that I think like when we talked about, like Teal's mentality on this thing, you know what I mean? Where it's this idea of like, what do you do? It's the same thing, I think, when you think about, say, extremist Islam or Chinese communists, right? They opt out of the Christian message altogether. It's not even a question about like, well, what if my neighbor? That ain't the right religion, just all completely. You know what I mean? It needs to be that whole way of thinking and stuff like that. We've we've got to change that, right, by force, right? And so it's kind of like you're left with the choice of kind of like just, you know, being sacrificial, letting it happen, and then possibly being destroyed, or you gotta, you know, push back on them and kind of defend yourself, right? And for me, it's hard to know it's hard to know which one, because I mean, I'm not gonna lie, like you know, the idea of, you know, I'm okay with, like, I don't agree with the whole idea of like going into foreign wars and stuff like that. You know what I mean? I feel like other countries should be allowed to join and have alliances with whoever they want to have alliances with. That's my thing. You know what I mean? You you know, influence, or American influence, should only come by imitation, right? Like
That's
willing
the
for
founding
imitation.
fathers. The best of the founding fathers said the same thing.
Yeah, you
John
know,
Quincy Adams says, America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy, but we're the well-wisher of freedom for all, right?
right,
We're to
right.
be a role model, the beacon
Yeah,
on a hill, the shining city on a
exactly.
hill that people want to emulate.
Yeah, and I agree with that. You know what I mean? I feel like if we're really that good, if we're really, you know, that great, right? People will automatically want to be like us. They can't help it. You know what I mean? Because we're so good at it. We're so great. You know what I mean? But you know, it's coerciveness, I think, that we use a lot of the times. It's force. You know what I mean? In the world that we're using. And I mean, I heard somebody tell me that America should not pull out of the Middle East, because we are already there now. So we should continue to carry out our duties, you know, in the Middle East, right? And my thing is okay, but how many times have you heard people say they don't want us there? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because we're not doing anything other than causing more destruction.
And the reason why we're causing destruction for the people that we're occupying, like in Afghanistan, is precisely because of the sacrificial crisis that Christianity has unleashed.
Yeah.
So, for example, I talked to a friend of mine, a Marine who was served in Afghanistan, and he said, we are not willing politically to sanction the level of brutality that would make the Afghani culture submit to us and the things that we want them to do. So we try to come into their country and say, you can't stone your daughter if she has adultery. Right. And then they say, well, yes, we can. And they say, no, you can't. We'll put you in jail. And they say, well, watch us. We'll take care of it. And then we'll, you know, hire some guy to get you. So, so the thing is, right, he said the level of brutality that we would need to do to make it sink in for their culture is something that we'll never have the political stomach to carry out.
Right.
Nor should we. And that's what I call that the idea of the impotent sacrifice.
Yeah.
And so my argument is not an idealistic argument for the reduction of state coercion. My argument, again, is an urgent message. Look, I could technically be the biggest statist I could in my mind and still say what I'm saying, which is that it's not working.
Right.
It's not working. So the level of violence that we would have to do to get the Afghanis to do what we want them to do, to force them to adopt concern for victims, to force them to educate their children the way we want to and not stone their daughters, we will not crucify them. We will not crucify them on the road to Kabul.
Right. We're not willing to be the Romans. Right.
We're never going to do that. Now, will we do now? Again, the dumb argument would be, well, we have examples of soldiers doing, but that's not sanctioned.
Right.
It's not sanctioned. At least it's not officially sanctioned. It's stuff in the shadows. It's road stuff, and some of them go to prison for it, and some of them get off the hook. But it's not the official policy.
Right.
If we would do, if we were in Afghanistan and we said, all right, on the road to the Capitol, there would be 500 people crucified for defying
Right.
our authority
Right.
that says no stoning of daughters. Those
Right.
people might pay attention.
Right.
But you know
Right.
who else
Right.
would pay attention before? The American people
Right.
and the
And they
Western
would condemn
world.
that. Right. Right.
They'd say, "No,
Yeah.
my God,"
They
it
put
would
it
be
on
the worst
blast.
thing ever.
Yep.
Beyond comprehension how bad it
Yep.
would be for us.
Yep. Yep.
It would
And,
be
and,
like,
and on top of that, bro, I'm not even gonna lie. That's scary, even thinking about that.
but
The
you
fact
have to
that we
think
have
that way.
the
You see it,
capability to do something like that. You know what I'm saying? And that's one reason why I could respect the Romans and at the same time see them as very, just so much unlike the way we're able to think, because they were willing to go out on a limb to give witness to people, to say, look, if you mess with us,
They were willing to go out on their limbs on a cross. You know what I mean?
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they weren't afraid of that. You know what I mean? The Persians weren't afraid of that.
But
you know what I mean?
it's because they did not have the infection of Christianity in them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so another common objection I might hear is, are you telling me that nobody in the Roman Empire prior to Christ had a problem morally with crucifying? No, I'm not saying that. But what we're saying is, as a culture, it was not a thing that could be socially condemned.
Right.
And that's what matters. It doesn't matter what, 3000 BC, there could have been a guy when they were stoning people 3,000 years ago, or 5,000 years ago. There could have been a guy in that crowd that's like, I don't like doing this. This is gross.
Right.
So we're not saying that,
But
right?
he wasn't going to say it out loud.
Do you agree with me about that? We're not saying that all humans never had a conscience for what they were doing in their sacrifice. Do you agree with that?
No. I think they did, and of course, I mean, when you come amongst other cultures, first of all, you have to remember the Romans were not just in Rome or Italy, right? I mean, by the time they became an empire, they had many different ethnic groups that were a part of, that were citizens, right? And some of those citizens, like the Jews, had different moral codes, moral standards. So for them, that would have been automatic, like, we don't agree with crucifixion, right? But of course, they had their own moral standing, which is stone them to death. You know what I mean? So of course, every, I wouldn't agree with the fact that, like, every single person.
Right. We're not making it. We're not doing histrionics here. We're not making an example of to say that pagans were all just bloodthirsty savages. That's not correct. That wouldn't be Christian to say that. You know what I mean?
Have to do in order to get, other countries in the Middle East to
do what we want them to do.
Do what we want them to do or perform. We have to use the kind of force that we're not ready to use, comfortable. Yeah.
And it's one of those things where, bombs, of course, are brutal.
Right.
But it's something about the torturous aspect of the old way of doing terror.
Right. That sends a kind of imprints of, Mm-hmm.
And so there's obvious torture in a bomb. If a bomb goes off, blows your leg off, you're in torture.
Right.
So let's not mistake that, but we don't see that. We see the little, it's a very abstract thing, we saw that recent Lebanon blast here.
Right.
And it was just this abstract, strange, almost like sacred phenomenon, not really, it's just terrifying. We don't know how to process it.
Right.
And then they always say, well, this is just, we're going after terrorists. And we're like, well, yeah, terrorists are the worst scumbags of all time.
Right.
Therefore, they were trying to kill the devil and they killed a few kids too. So it's not bad. Mm-hmm. But to crucify people for disobeying the law is something we're not willing to do. And it's the same thing for my argument against the, the tough on crime crowd here in America, right? Mm-hmm. Which is that, they say we got to get tougher on crime. We need to get cracked down harder. We need to increase the policing. We need to get over there and do all this stuff. As if that's some kind of like masculine defense against the forces of that chaos that you were referring to earlier. Right. Yeah. And here's the problem with that. Same thing. Mm-hmm. We're not willing to do the level of violence necessary to make sacrifice actually slightly efficacious as it was in the old times.
Right.
So, for example, if a sheriff says, I don't like drugs,
Mm-hmm.
so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the public square of my town, and we're going to live record people being crucified for selling a certain level of marijuana, cocaine or any other drugs that we're going after. We're going to live record it. You're going to be able to go to the city government website and watch people being crucified or publicly flogged or what have you. Right. Now, me just saying that in the modern context makes people recoil. What are you talking about? That's the level of violence that would need to be employed to make the logic of the sacred survive, right? Because the whole point of it is you have to make something so terrifying that people say, you know what, I was going to sell this weed, but I'm throwing it in the river. I'm done. I just watched this crazy sheriff crucify 10 people. This guy's crazy.
They saw the president. They saw the president of the Philippines. That's what happened.
Exactly.
That's No, but I get your point.
The Philippines have not had an infection quite as long historically with Christianity as we have, which is why a president there can even get away with that kind of stuff as public policy. Our president gets crucified when he says that you maybe you need to shove the violent criminals' heads into the roof of the car when you put them in the back of the cop. Remember, he said, just shove them real hard in there. And he gets crucified for that. So we're not even talking about public floggings or anything like that. We couldn't take it. So here's the thing. What do we have instead? We have a very feminine approach to law and order, which is a prison. So that's a very overly motherly, like in a negative, not in the good part of motherly, the bad perversion of motherhood, where it's like, you will be my child for the next 55 years in prison because you're naughty and you got high on a drug, or you sold a drug, or you were the girlfriend of a guy who sold drugs and you're part of a conspiracy. That's where most of these people go to prison, is conspiracy laws. The federal
confine you on timeout.
So we're going to put you in our little, cubby hole. And we're going to feed you. We're going to give you socialized free medicine. You can learn a degree. You can have therapy. You can have little jobs. You can get 10 cents an hour making rape-resistant curtains, which they do.
License plates.
So that's that's not tough. That's like mothering. So these people on the right who are like, we're tough, we're going to put them away. It's like, no, you're actually, that's weak. Because even though prison is torture on some level, it's not crucifixion. You've got air conditioning sometimes. You've got a place to
air conditioning.
You've got And I'm not. I mean, look, it's bad in some places. I hear these. They come onto my show. But the point is, you still got a roof. You still got food. You don't got to pay for the food.
You're not. You're not on display.
Pay for the Snickers, and the Snickers is a premium price at the the commissary or whatever.
But, they give you a chance to think through your mistakes.
That's very Christianized. Even though I hate it, even though I'm against it for most of these nonviolent crimes. So the question is, look, we're at this weird moment where the impotence of sacrifice will continue to make our attempt to reassert it blow back. Because what would happen, Shannon, if one sheriff in America decided that he was going to publicly whip or crucify a person accused of a crime, any crime for that matter. But let's say the crimes that they say we need to get tougher on, like drugs and stuff like that. What would happen? Like, tell me, what would happen? Well, how would the public respond to
that? I mean, I don't know. He'd probably go into hiding. That's probably the best option.
And we know,
or commit suicide. You know what I mean? It's like, bruh, you don't really have any other choice.
And we know that our sensitivity to victims is making our prison system itself on the hot seat for needing to reform the ways it handles things. The rights of a prisoner and the things that they're put through. So my question is, you got two ways to deal with law and order. You can do it the way that imitates Christ, but you can do it the way where you say, let's return a little bit to the sacred. Let's return a little bit to some tough.
Well, and that's what I meant about, I think, kind of like turning back to the law in the sense of kind of like there's because I think that people, like you said, they can't fathom returning back to like this ancient sacredness, but I think they would opt for kind of like the Judaic legal tradition, right? The following the law, and if you don't follow that law, there's punishment. But of course, the ancient Israelite tradition also has violent modes to deal with problems. You know what I mean? I mean, if you commit adultery, you be stoned to death. You know what I mean? So I mean that.
Yeah. But my point is, can you have a law without it being enforced with violence? Like,
no,
for example,
I don't think. I don't.
Well, let me put it this way: not law.
Yeah.
But can you have a public good?
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's say we in the public good, in the interest of the public good, we say in this society that it's wrong to commit adultery. Now, I know that's weak right now. That's been weakened.
Yeah.
But that's a moray that we don't enforce necessarily with violence. See,
right.
You don't go to prison if you do adultery.
Right.
So can you have that same effect for other vices and sins that should not be punished with the law? Saying can we have a society where we say in America we publicly frown on people being addicted to drugs and selling them, but we're not going to employ sacred violence to stop it because we're going to act a little more Christian about the way we deal with this sin.
Yeah.
We might shun you.
Yeah.
We might shun you. That's kind of a proto scapegoating. You're like,
right.
You're not invited to our parties anymore.
Right.
Because you're doing drugs or selling them.
Yeah.
We might fire you from our company because you're high.
Yeah. Right.
We might boycott your business if you're selling the drug. We might refuse service to you if we have a bank and you're selling a drug. So we might do some social, nonviolent kind of shunning, which you could say is proto-social scapegoat. But we're not going to put the violent part. Because once you employ the violence, it creates this blowback in which there becomes a martyr's energy for the person you're persecuting. See what I mean?
Yeah.
It really inflames the black market there. It really creates this edginess. That's why every Netflix documentary is about drug war.
Right.
Everybody's fascinated by it. It's our Robin Hoods of our, of our society.
Yeah. That's it's just really hard to think about ways in which to have people do the right thing without fear, without fear of the of the right hand, right? And I think you might say, maybe our society is still in a push and pull relationship with that. You know what I mean? I mean, the thing is, like, even Paul recognizes his faults. He said that I ought to do, I do not. And I don't, I shouldn't do, I find myself continuously doing. You know what I mean? So, and he recognized that the fact that, Christ has come and that the law is sort of lost its place, because of grace, right? But yet and still, I think he recognizes that it's hard for people to do the right thing, right? It's hard for people to do the right thing just because they want to. And
but it's so easy to me. Here's why. It's not easy to do. It's not easy to do the right thing. Okay, but here's why I think it's simple. Well, I don't know. It's not simple, but to me, it looks simple on paper because it's like
that's what I'm saying.
Because the only thing you got to do is you create mimetic contagions. You create You create a snowball effect of people going along with it mindlessly because that's what people do.
Right.
So if the churches would actually freaking teach Jesus,
right,
instead of social justice,
if they would actually
solve
live
these problems.
Yeah.
Look, they don't even have to live it. I'm having a lower threshold here. You don't even have to be a nice guy. Just as a church, say no victim, no crime. Like that's my theory. I know that's me.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else says that. I don't know about this anthropological problem we have. But my theory is that if the church would like systematically integrate that into their public witness, that would be enough of a starting base of people, right?
Yeah.
Institutionally, to catch fire of a mimetic contagion of other people. Say, no victim, no crime. Right. No victim, no crime. No victim, no crime. No victim, no crime. And it's like a penguin. It's like, like a little parrots. And they just, and it spreads. Right. If you had that kind of teaching and you actually taught that, no victim, no crime, I believe, this is my theory, that it would unleash a tremendous amount of positive reciprocity in which people would have a proper response to a George Floyd killing rather than an improper response. Right now, they're being catechized by lawless, fake churches, antichrist churches, like the wokeism and stuff. But if the real church said, excuse me, we're not going to imitate wokeism, but we are going to step in here and say, you don't treat people in this condition, or you don't do this, you don't do no-knock raids, you don't choke people because they're selling an unlicensed cigarette. But the first thing is you don't have the law on the books in the first place. If you don't send a person, because here's the thing that I'm trying to say, there's a mythic sacred to the law.
Yes, no, that is, I think, without a doubt, true, right? The law is I think just a you might say a carryover or a double of a religious institution, right? I mean, you can see that in the way that they dress, right? You can see that in the way that they look, especially if you go to
the judge in the black thing.
You know what I mean? Especially if you go to England, right?
The wigs,
you see that in just about everything, right? Their colors, the fact that they wear red, you know what I mean? That's a mimic of the cardinals, right? And you have, the lower judges wearing black, and, the lawyers and barristers wearing black. That's a mimic of the priests. So of course it has that, right? And but I want to say that in the same way that Jews and Muslims, like this is us going back to that, right? This in the same way that Jews, Muslims follow the law, I think the secular legal tradition is the same thing, right? You have people that really believe in that, and it's because they don't really believe in the Christian message. They don't trust it, right? They don't trust that you're gonna get that,
But it's everywhere.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, and maybe that's also the influence of the Western tradition is this legality kind of thing stuff.
Let me give you an example. Like alcohol. A lot of Christians said, and women especially were saying, we got to ban alcohol because there's a lot of abuse with alcohol.
Yeah.
And so the question is, if we were going back in time in that moment, what you're kind of saying, and to analogize it, is like someone saying, well, wait a second. If we keep alcohol legal, are you saying that we're not going to get pulverized by drunks everywhere? And the question is, technically, you can't say yes, because you can't say, if we keep alcohol legal, you'll be safe from a drunk husband. That's not correct.
Right.
But at the same time, when you take that shortcut to heaven, the heaven is my husband can't have alcohol and hurt me or whatever.
Right.
Which led the women's suffrage, the women's movement to go on board with this prohibition.
Right.
To be able to go in there and say, wait a second. So if we use the law in an abusive overreach right here, it's not going to just solve the problem. It's actually going to make it worse, because now you're going to create a profit motive for moonshine, which is even more addictive and toxic.
Right.
Because it's easier to port when a black market. When you have a black market, things get smaller because you got to give them that same hit at a smaller package.
Right.
So you can distribute it because of the danger of distribution.
Right.
So you get this rise of the moonshine and hard liquor, and at the same time, you get a skyrocketing of the murder rate. Yeah. So in Tampa, 75 murder rate per capita, it's like double what Detroit and Chicago are today during their drug war. Once you legalized alcohol, that murder rate plummeted back. It went down. So here's the thing. To me, that's Jesus's turning of the cheek principle.
Mm-hmm.
He's creating a social ordering principle there. If you resist evil with violence, it will reciprocate more violence.
Mm-hmm.
So the lesson so you're saying like we got to teach people that you can trust that if you try liberty with Christ, it will succeed. And I'm just saying, we have examples. Just show people. Like teach the church. I'm literal. I'm saying it.
Yeah.
Teach the church. Yeah. This is why you can, because like Fox News listeners, 80 people died in Chicago today. This weekend, 80 people shot in Chicago. What's the Democrats doing? It's like, come on. So stupid. Why don't you teach people? Like, yeah, of course there's nihilism with Democrat cities, but it's so dumb to make it that simple. The reason it's there is because of the lawlessness, because Al Capones are running around Chicago. Al Capone couldn't run around Tampa as much once they said, wait, that was a wicked pagan use of the law to create a Christian outcome. Wait. So they stopped it. Now, did it solve alcohol? No, there's still alcoholic drunks right now. So that's the thing. What I'm saying is not utopia. It's the opposite. It's those who want the state. They're the utopians in all of this, man. They're the utopians. Now, I'm not saying get rid of the state. I'm just saying like the idea of using the state beyond a very minimal means. If we're going to have a state, it protects property. It protects us from invasion. It protects us from fraud with court system. It protects us from rape and assault and the harm of children. Those are it. That's it. What more do you really need?
Yeah.
And that's the faith to me. So I see it like people not believing that that's enough is people believing and having their faith in sacrifice, not Christ.
Yeah.
If you have faith in Christ, then you know that's enough. That God will provide all your needs according to His riches and purposes and glory. Right.
But see, that's the thing is that this is I think that's that is the separating point is that there are those of us who, we take the if of believing in Christ. We sign up for that, right? And there are just people who just don't. And it could be because they don't trust it, but it could also be because they just don't like Christianity. They don't like the weakness that we've talked about, right? That it proposes a weakness about it, that I have to.
But Christianity's tough because it allows.
I agree with this. Yeah. I agree with what you're saying. But what I'm saying is there are people, right? I think that my example would always be to go back to China. I think this is one state that they're not having it. And if ever they get the chance to, if they ever got the chance to hear the US say, we opt out for, all of that, and we're going to follow Christianity, trust Christ, blah, blah, blah. China would be like, thank you very much. It's, you know what I'm saying? It's on and cracking.
But I'm telling you, man, I'm not. So you're saying like dissolving our state? No, I'm not saying dissolving it. I'm saying scale it back and allow people their liberty that Christ demands of history.
I agree with that.
If we did that, my friend, I think we would have like cold fusion stuff, and China would be like, oh, they'd be like, holy crap, holy shnikes. I'm not gonna go in. I'm not going 1 foot in that freaking fortress America, because that place has got stuff that we can't even dream of over here. Now, of course, you could say, well, they'd steal it. Well, that's another problem. But in the meantime, if we would unleash liberty, we would have flying cars that could get anti-gravity. I know that sounds silly, but I want people
no, it doesn't.
think wow, come on, man. We gotta have some freaking courage in this country anymore. Chicken people, we gotta just try to protect ourselves from China. Screw that. Get your liberty back and go kick some ass. Let's cure cancer so nobody's all dying all the time. Let's cure Alzheimer's so we don't know what the heck, so we can know where we're going when we go to the store. Let's cure this shit and let's get to work. And don't worry, and then have trust that God is faithful and God is good. That if we are faithful to Him, there's no reason to fear, And it's we're never going to get the majority to get this, but we need to get at least 10% of the population. I'm just throwing a number, 10% that understand the Christian liberty message.
Right.
Because that's all it takes to cure these diseases. And
Yeah.
I'm telling you, I believe that if China tries something, that they are already infected by Christianity. There's some 200
Mm-hmm.
million Christians there.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're on their own trajectory of collapse from within because of the Christian challenge to their sacred order. So
Yeah.
they're just on a different different
Trajectory. Yeah.
timeline of how that's
Yeah.
playing out for them. That's
Yeah.
my theory. So
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
their
And
chickens are going to come home to roost. The
yeah.
moment they try
Yeah.
to come after our cold fusion
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
our transmutation and our
Yeah. Yeah.
anti-gravity
Yeah.
to
And
use
I
it against us, they're going to
yeah.
be already getting smoked by their own internal opposition. That's my
Yeah.
theory.
Yeah. Yeah. And I see that. And I totally, like, for me, 100%, I'm on board with you. You know how I feel about the whole scientific revolution. Like, we need to, whatever. We should be on that track. You know what I mean? I'm completely for that. You know what I mean? I don't see why we haven't cured cancer. You know what I mean? It's been whatever you want to say. Since the 1970s, we talked about doing that, right? And so, you know, I agree with you. I agree with Elon Musk. I agree with Peter Thiel. I agree with, whoever else you want to say. You know what I mean? But I also am just, I don't know. Maybe I gotta let the faith work its course to get over that whole idea of somebody coming over here and just being like, America effed up with that whole Christian message. So now we're gonna go ahead and, we'll go ahead and forward hand and backhand them. You know what I mean?
Now, I think we will have technology that when they try to come at us, they're going to get their weapons blown up in the sky
Yeah, yeah.
before they can get off the plane.
That would be filthy. That's if something like that, you know what I'm saying? We could do something like that to where any kind of attack could be thwarted by, immediate cutoff. I'm down for that. You know what I mean? It's like a meteor coming. You know what I'm saying? You just
I
blow
don't
the
think
meteor up.
China. I don't think China's ruthless like that. I mean, some of them are, but I think they're more like if we scaled back our government.
Yeah.
If we scale back our government, I think we'd be more dangerous to them than they would possibly imagine. I think they know that. I think they are smarter than that. I think they're terrified of us becoming like a liberty country again. Because they're going to get smoked.
Yeah.
They're going to get smoked. I'm telling you.
Yeah. Because then everybody wants to be like us.
Yeah. Not just that, but also look at all the friends we'll win around the world again.
Right.
We'll gain our respect back from all the sideline countries that are watching the fight between China and America.
Right.
And not to say that they're sidelined, but I mean in that dispute. And then the second thing is we're gonna be able to have such efficiency,
right,
that you could scale that government down that we have down to like 10% of what it is now.
Right.
And it would have more lethality to defend against any kind of weaponry. It would be like night and day. It'd be like alien technology versus our good friends the Neanderthal.
Right. Right.
I'm serious. I really believe it.
No,
I believe that's what Jesus wants. He wants us to have that kind of amazing comfort of blessing.
I think you're right about that, right? In the sense that, see, nobody pays attention to you when they, when they think you're, or it's kind of like being like the nerd in high school or whatever, right? Everybody kind of looked at you as like, you're just a nerd, right? But then once you got out of college and became the chief engineer or whatever, it's kind of like now everybody wants to be your friend, right? And I think that model what I'm saying is kind of in the same mode, right? Is that if America pulls back from trying to be the cool guy on the block, be the strong man, and really turn our scientific enterprise into our strength.
Amen. So it's not that we're not tough right now. We look like weaklings,
right?
Because we're so insecure,
right?
That if one country in the Middle East doesn't do what we want, we got to do a whole media blitz to loot them, and everybody sees it, and everybody knows that we're an insecure, bloated empire. Yeah. But if we were to become a scaled back, decentralized republic, And I'm not saying that it's, an easy process, but if we were to become a lean, decentralized republic, in which each states could have their own cold fusion reactors, kind of ain't touching us. And when Chinese people look on television and see that we've got unlimited 24/7 energy panels powering our homes, we don't need a grid anymore, they're not going to put up with the nonsense back at home from their government, because they're going to say, wait a second, I don't need you. If I get that technology over here, I can have my house energy fully taken care of without paying you a check as a rent seeker. And I can, wait a second, I can use 3D printing to make a home that's better structurally than your stupid government mandates allow. And I can I can take this and cure this disease. And I can, wait a second, so you're telling me that I can, have a car that's powered by a liter of ocean water for 20 years straight? Why would I go back to you guys? You guys are not. So government, you don't take on government, you make government obsolete. Right. But it makes it's like a catch-22. Government is so entrenched in holding us back with their regulations and distortions of the market and freedom that you have to kind of reduce some of it to make them obsolete. So it's like they strangle us so much like a parasite that it's so hard to even think outside the box or do anything to start doing the innovations to make their garbage sacrifice more obsolete. So you have to kind of pare it back, innovate, pare it back, innovate. That whole process, I think, is what we need to think strategically as people that love, civilization. It's a scaling of the tentacles, but you're not going to get them all off. But you scale some of it back, you get some innovation. Right. And I believe that the Christian liberty message would cure the racial and gender strife. Not cure it completely, but I think it would heal that and tune that, relax that a little bit. I tell you, when I talked to Angela Yee of the Breakfast Club, right? Here's a person, when she had Rush Limbaugh on, they couldn't see eye to eye on anything. But when I talked to her, we were on the same page on like almost everything at the end. She was bringing up my idea. I talked about Jubilee zones where we go into inner cities that have been plagued by poverty and say no income tax, no payroll tax, get rid of all the victimless crime laws, get rid of the gun laws, get rid of the drug laws, get rid of all those regulations, get rid of the licensure law, so you don't have to get a big expensive thing to cut a hair or something. Get rid of all that, have a Jubilee zone. And she's like, oh, I love that, right? Yeah. She was a little bit tricky. She was a little bit hesitant about repealing the gun laws. But I was like, wait a second, that's where all your stop and frisk happen, because they can stop her. Oh, I think you got a gun. It's like, no, if that man owns a gun, he ain't doing nothing to you. He's not threatening anybody. He's not brandishing anybody. Yeah. He's not accused of her. Leave him alone or her alone, right? But see, that liberty Jubilee concept is from Christ. Yes. Yeah. And if you did that, I think people in different races and genders would say, hey, it's not so tight in it. It's not so constricting anymore. It's not so like pressure cooker. Yeah. Wait a second. I got my own paycheck. It's not going to solve it. It's not a panacea. But it's that's what Christians should be doing,
Yeah. These are some good thoughts, man. It's we've covered a lot of ground, right? But I'm gonna have to think more about this whole, do we need a little bit of the sacred in order to? You know what I mean? It's because I really yeah. I'm gonna have to think about that.
Well, very good, man. Hey, I appreciate the discussion. Very interesting stuff, and I think we covered a lot of stuff today. So
yeah, bro, we got to keep it up, man.
Very good.